Northern Ireland, a small step to a giant adventure. Book your next giant adventure at discovernorthernireland.com.
Hello, you're very welcome to Féile Talk. It's entitled Irish History, Past History, Future Prospects. And my name is Brendan Cross of the Irish News, and I'm glad to introduce Gerry Carlile and Cormac Moore. Just by way of introduction here, Gerry, a lot of people would know Gerry up here anyway. Gerry became the first FIFA licensed football agent in 2007 and established the first elite sports management company in the North. He has represented a host of international professional footballers from across Ireland and beyond. Gerry also founded a chain of hospitality outlets across the North and Scotland. More recently, Gerry has taken the post of Chief Executive of Ireland's Future. That's an organisation that is working to achieve a new and united Ireland. Cormac Moore is a historian with Dublin City Council. He's also an author of Birth of the Border, The Impact of Partition in Ireland, and also the Irish Soccer Split. As well as that, he's written on the GAA versus Douglas Hyde. A prolific writer, he has contributed to various journals, books, and newspapers. I was speaking to Cormac the other day ahead of this. I found that he's a Manchester United fan and a big Roy Keane fan as well. So just by way, we'll start this very gently. I'd like to ask you about the Roy Keane, maybe ancient history now, Cormac, but I take it you were on Roy Keane's side when Saipan unfolded.
I actually was living in Australia at the time, and I flew to Japan just to see Roy Keane play in the World Cup. And look, I had a great time in Japan, but it was bittersweet that Keane wasn't there. But yeah, I was on the Roy Keane camp. So that's probably half the viewers gone now at this stage. It still is a very hot topic, very controversial. But yeah, I was firmly in the Roy Keane camp.
Yeah, I just asked Gerry, where were you, Gerry? What side of the fence were you on that time?
Well, very much on the team side of things. You've an opportunity to play for your country. You have to stick with them. Yeah,
I remember actually I was covering the World Cup for the Irish News at that time. A rookie journalist ended up, and I remember standing beside Colin Keys, actually a journalist of the Irish Independent, and both of us it was a few minutes before the first match against Cameroon, and two of us just were shaking our heads. How would a man refuse this? How would a man walk away from this? But we got the Genesis report, and that was hardly groundbreaking, so I don't know. But it was interesting times. There's a lot to get through. It's a big topic, Irish soccer, past history and future prospects. Where do you start? I'd like to ask Cormac, first of all. Cormac, in terms of you've obviously an obsession, a passion for this topic, where you've married sport and academia. Can you just give us a bit of background where that passion came from?
Yeah, well, I love sports. A huge fan of most sports. Pretty much glued to the Olympics at the moment. Even sports I don't see every 4 or 5 years as it transpires. I'm hugely passionate about history. And when I was doing my master's there over 10 years ago, in deciding a topic, I wanted to marry the two. So to marry sport and history, and sport history is a kind of a niche area. It's growing, but it still is pretty niche. And I thought that I could marry the two, and that's where my first book, the GAA versus Douglas Hyde, came from. And from that, I became interested in looking at the division in Irish football. So yeah, it really comes from a passion for both sport and history, and trying to marry the two.
Not allowed to shout. You've not allowed a lot to shout about at the minute with Laois, Cormac, on the GAA front.
Well, we never had. We've won one hurling Ireland in 1915 and no football All Ireland. So this is not exactly uncharted territory for us to lose a lot of matches and not to go very far.
Yeah. Can I just we'll start off. There's a interesting starting point, Cormac, I suppose. Given the fact that it's 100 years since the soccer split, the events leading up to that split, could you just articulate or maybe just set the scene how that came about?
Yeah, well, I've argued in my book and my PhD that the reason for the soccer split, the primary reason, was not the partition of Ireland, but the actual the internal governance structures within the Irish Football Association. So from 1880, the Irish Football Association, headquartered in Belfast, was the governing authority for all of football in Ireland. However, people outside of Belfast and its surrounding areas felt there was a Belfast bias in terms of venues for international matches played in Ireland, in terms of selection of players, and even on who was on the IFA Council and its different subcommittees. Those tensions and disagreements had been boiling, kind of steadily for years before the partition of Ireland. And although the partition of football happened the same year as the partition of Ireland, it was more coincidental than actual the main major reason for it. I do believe there would have been a split anyway, because of the way soccer was governed in Ireland. And Dublin at that stage, even though Belfast is where football kind of started really growing and becoming popular, and was very successful in Belfast for years. But by the 1900, Dublin was growing as well, and clubs like Shelbourne and Bohemians were making great inroads, and they started to want to have more of a say, more players on the international team. Dublin to be chosen more as a venue for matches, and it was only a matter of time before this came to a head.
It's interesting, Cormac, maybe people coming to this subject cold would automatically think, well, there was a neat symmetry between partition and the soccer split, but it was much more nuanced than that, wasn't it?
Yeah, no. That's not to say that the partition of Ireland didn't have an impact. It did. It definitely contributed to the split. In fact, a month before the infamous Shelbourne-Glenavon fixture, there was an incident called a flag incident in Paris, where it was an amateur international between Ireland and France, and there was students who happened to be from the Royal College of Surgeons who were displaying tricolour flags, and the IFA had them removed. And this caused a lot of consternation in Dublin, who felt that it was bringing politics into football, where it should not have been. So that was only in February 1921, and then in March, and the FAI decided that games could only be played in Belfast because of the troubles in Dublin at the time. Now, there was a lot of trouble in Dublin at the time, but the Belfast IFA officials didn't seem to realise there was as much, if not more, trouble in Belfast at the time. And it was certainly more civilians were impacted on the trouble in Belfast than in Dublin. But they didn't seem to care that Shelbourne had to go to Belfast and jeopardise their safety. But it was unacceptable for Belfast clubs to go to Dublin for their safety. So that's the reason why they left. So obviously there was a factor in terms of the political environment at the time. But that was just a catalyst. There was a lot of trouble, a lot of issues between Dublin and Belfast for decades before that. And it really, and if we look at all of the correspondence between the IFA and the subsequent FAI, it was all about internal governance reasons, about why didn't we get any players on the team for that particular year, or why have you not chosen Dublin as a venue instead of Belfast? There was 52 internationals before the split in Ireland, and only 6 of them are played in Dublin. Also, the IFA Council, if you look at who was on the IFA Council and its subcommittees, it was all people from Belfast, from Antrim, who dominated those committees, including the International Selection Committee, which chose the international team at the time. And that was what really bugged the Dublin officials, not the political situation at the time.
Yeah, when you look at those figures, Cormac, I kind of plagiarised these figures from your own research. Even international caps, there was only 75 between 1882. I know we're going back a bit here. 1882 and 1921, there was only 75 caps given to guys from Leinster clubs, whereas Ulster-based players there was 798. It's quite stark, those figures, aren't they?
Yeah, no, I will add one caveat. Most of the professional clubs were based in Ulster. Ulster brought in professionalism before Leinster did. There were mainly just 2 clubs to choose from Leinster. That was Shelbourne and Bohemians, who had relative success in terms of the Irish Cup and even the Irish Football League, even though neither club won it. So that is a caveat. But by 1920, even by 1900, Leinster clubs were competing at a similar level to Ulster clubs, but it did not get the requisite amount of caps for that. And that really did cause a lot of dismay within Leinster. So like you're talking about a 10-to-1 ratio there of between Ulster and Leinster caps. And it definitely didn't, I do accept there probably should be more Ulster caps, certainly not 10-to-1 ratio.
Absolutely. And also, I think the Southern clubs, the Leinster clubs also bemoaned where the financial assistance was being directed. Was that fair comment, do you think?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The FA or the IFA was very reluctant to give money to particularly clubs and councils or regional associations outside of Ulster. The Munster, for example, found it very hard to get any funding from the IFA. In one example, they asked for £25, and it wasn't given. And then in the same meeting, a testimonial amount was offered to a committee member, J.M. Small, for £25. So it just shows where their priorities were. Leinster did get money from the IFA, but they also felt it was too little and it wasn't enough compared to what other associations, divisional associations, were getting.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at it. Do you think when that split happened? Do you think it's a long time ago now? But do you think that the football people at that time said, "Well, we'll fall out with each other for a period, but it'll be inevitable that we'll find reconciliation"?
I think the IFA thought that they were, because there was a split before 1912. Now it wasn't the Leinster Ulster split. It was based on most of the professional clubs actually seceded from the IFA because they felt it was an amateur body. They felt that they weren't getting enough of the take of matches compared to what the IFA was getting. So most of the clubs left. The main clubs left the IFA in 1912. The only ones that didn't were Linfield and Bohemians, and that lasted for a number of months. But they eventually got back together again. So the IFA felt, look, if this happens, we'll come to some understanding. But as time went on in 1921, and the FAI was then formed, and then it actually created its own league, the Football League of Ireland. And this is September 1921, and it actually had clubs and every playing against each other. It included clubs as well from Belfast, Alton United, for example. So at that stage, by late 1921, the IFA knew this is serious. This is actually more serious than any other potential split beforehand. And they did try from there on in. The IFA never wanted for partition in football. Either did the FAI. The FAI wanted to be an All-Ireland body, the main All-Ireland body for football in Ireland. But from 1922, they did start to kind of feel each other out and see could there be an understanding. And there was a number of conferences from 1923 up to 1932 to see could there be a reunification in the sport.
And what was the main stumbling blocks in that initial period?
Well, the main stumbling blocks were internal governance reasons. Basically, the IFA, the fourth oldest football association in the world, was very proud of its history, and it wanted to keep as much power as it wanted. Whereas this new usurper, FAI, wanted to have total equality with the IFA, right down to a seat on the International Football Association board, which the IFA still hold seats on. So those are the main reasons. It came out of finances. It came down to, if we look at the two main conferences where there was a really good chance of reunification, 1924 and 1932. 1924, the FAI were given pretty much equality, except that the chairperson would remain of the International Selection Committee would remain the IFA chairperson. That was unacceptable to the FAI. And then in 1932, the FAI at the last minute requested a seat on the international board, and the IFA refused that. So those were very small reasons, it sounds like, to maintain the split. But they were what's concerned the people and the administrators most of the time. So it's primarily internal governance reasons.
Yeah, you roll into obviously the World War, and then the 1950s. There's a wee bit of rancor there, even over the name. What name the Republic of Ireland, it became the Republic of Ireland. They were called Ireland, and the IFA didn't like the fact that they were calling themselves Ireland. So there was a bit of semantic argument around the 50s too, which probably didn't help any sort of prospect of reconciliation between the two associations.
Yeah, well, the IFA and the FAI selected players for their Ireland teams up until the 1950s, particularly the IFA. We've a lot of players born in the 26 counties who played for the Ireland team selected by the IFA. Now, once the British teams came back to FIFA fold in the late 40s and competed for their first World Cup in 1950, FIFA said you can only have players selected that were born in your territory. So the IFA particularly had to stop the practice of selecting players in their team that were born in 26 counties. But they still maintained the name Ireland. If you look at the match programs, you see Ireland up until the 1970s in some cases for IFA and selected teams. And then the Republic of Ireland team came into being once a Republic of Ireland was declared in 1949. There was a funny anecdote to that. When Northern Ireland did really well in the 1958 World Cup, getting to the quarter-final, some people commentated that they don't want to be called Ireland because the South is getting the credit for what Northern Ireland were doing. So there are some people saying, actually, no, we want to be called Northern Ireland now because we were the ones who actually got to the quarter-final of the World Cup, not the South.
There's a fascinating period. Every day is a school day. When I was looking into this, thanks for your direction on this, Cormac. The 1970s, people remember the 1970s here and they automatically think it's just a bloody conflict. And yet with all, in the background, there was fairly serious attempts to get together again, which went under the radar in many respects.
Yeah, I was doing research in Prony, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, where the IFA papers are housed, and I looked at the minutes from 1970s, and there was quite a lot of correspondence between the IFA and the FAI about not necessarily amalgamating into one association, but having one international team. That was seriously looked at. It all came off the back of that a very famous match in Lansdowne Road between the Shamrock Rovers 11 versus that brilliant Brazil team. Which I think more people seem to be at that match than were in the GPO in 1916, based on who you talk to. But after that match in July 1973, the FAI contacted the IFA about meeting up to see if they could actually have a reunion or at least one international team. And the IFA took it seriously. Now, Harry Cavan, he was the president of the IFA, and he's also vice president of FIFA. He was seen as a stumbling block, but he was open to those talks. And he said it was actually nonsensical to have two football teams on this small island. So about 10 conferences happened from 73 up until the very beginning of 1980. But the Troubles definitely contributed to the breakdown of the talks. There was also the prospect of losing money, losing finances. And they kind of did dwindle away in the 1980s. And then obviously the success of, first of all, the Northern Ireland team and then the Republic of Ireland team from the 80s onwards. And I think that didn't help matters either, because Harry Cavan himself said in the 80s, we're doing so well. Why would we want a United Ireland team? We're actually getting to World Cups and we're winning British home championships. So there's no need. So yeah, there's a lot of factors at play. There was definitely a prospect, I think, of an international team, but it just dwindled out. I think the Troubles were a big factor in that.
Yeah, there's probably up to that point. There's maybe an emotional reasons to get back together, but then it seems as if as time went on, it became more financial. If we have one international team, that's a revenue stream broken. Instead of having two revenue streams and more money coming in, maybe even European places at club level, all those things. Yeah. So it was quite. It kind of it shifted in that sense, didn't it?
Yeah, those issues were brought up a lot. Finances, sharing the pot instead of having two pots. The European club competitions, the European Cup, the UEFA Cup, and Cup Winners' Cup, and all of those competitions. Yeah, they were discussed. Would they only get? But that could have been resolved, though. I think if you look at FIFA, is a lot more flexible than it's given credit for, or maybe it shouldn't be given credit for being as flexible. Look, for example, the United Kingdom is one country politically, but there are 4 associations from it. FIFA, which is an anomaly, that's because of the history, though. So, but FIFA can be very flexible as well. Like Gibraltar is not a country, but it still has a place in FIFA. Same with Kosovo wasn't a country when it was first recognised by FIFA. So there's a lot of anomalies within FIFA. I think with someone like Cavan and other vice presidents, they could have sorted something out. I think I do think it was. I think it was the main stumbling block was the Troubles in many respects, and also yet this notion of suits. You know, they've got their jobs. Would they lose their jobs as well? You know, and that's been mentioned a lot by people. And of course, that's a very natural emotion. You know, if you're a full-time employee, that's your livelihood. You don't want to lose your livelihood, and that be in jeopardy by amalgamating the two associations.
I think that prevails today still, you know, very much so. What I also found interesting too was at that time, there's so many big players. We'll bring Jerry in on this as well. There's so many big players, George Best, Derek Dugan, Liam Brady, who were arguing or were lobbying or supporting an All-Ireland team. And I found that strange come to that, because I think modern day players are maybe sometimes reticent about involving themselves in, you know, the debates of the day. It's, you know, I've interviewed many a footballer and sports person, and you come away, they're media trained to an inch of their life. They don't want to say anything. And yet with all back then, you know, if they were asked a question, all these guys came out and were very much supportive of the idea. Just that juxtaposition there, Jerry, that those guys happily supported it. But if there was a current Northern Ireland player now that came out and said, "Yeah, I would like to see an all-Ireland team," I think they would be criticised, you know, in social media. Very, you know, the media, the backdrop of it is there's if someone says something, it becomes hysterical. Just in terms of that, Jerry, from those guys back, George Best era, Deny. What's your thoughts on that?
I think generally speaking, Brendan, that professional sports stars, whether it's football or almost any other sport, generally speaking, they cocoon themselves from the broader societal conversations that are going on. There are exceptions. Look at Marcus Rashford in terms of some of the things that he has been vocal about, and there are others. But I think in terms of here, it hasn't really featured as a serious conversation until very recently again, and I think that's why a lot of the players have generally kept their heads down and got on with playing rather than commenting on something that doesn't actually seem like it could ever happen. I think that's something that's that is starting to change, and that will significantly change over the course of the coming years.
Just go back to Cormac in terms of, you know, all these talks throughout the, you know, intermittently, the 20s, the 30s, the 50s, the 70s. But those talks about reconciliation or getting the two associations together now, it's almost don't exist. It's almost like, you know, in terms of the association, outside of the associations, I think it's a burning issue. But the associations themselves, there is no discourse anymore about that.
Yeah, there hasn't been, and obviously, I think something happened in the late 80s as well. Like it was particularly like football became really embroiled, I think, in a lot of the sectarianism and a lot of the violence that was happening. You know, there was a lot of instances, and in my book, Irish Soccer Split, I actually open up. My introductory chapter is on that horrible night in November '93. When that happened before, that kind of ugliness, you know, when the Republic of Ireland played Northern Ireland in the World Cup qualifier, that was one of the ugliest matches I remember growing up. And that hadn't happened before. And there was this kind of, you know, in the latter kind of stage of the Troubles, there's a lot more tension at soccer matches, and it became more embroiled, I thought, in the actual Troubles. Now, obviously, from the Good Friday Agreement, and, you know, where there is relative peace in the North, the relationships have been better. You know, there have been All-Ireland competitions like Santa Cup and so on. Yeah. And there's a lot more cooperation between the FAI and IFA. But yeah, that discussion hasn't happened at all. Now, there is obviously talk of this All-Ireland League that, you know, Kieran Lucid and others have talked about. And there seems to be a lot of support, I think, within the FAI particularly, and with most clubs. So, you know, that could be an avenue where if there was an All-Ireland League, then you could maybe see that there could be a possibility of an All-Ireland international team. So who knows? Like, as I wrote in my book, it was surprising that there was actually talk in the 70s, you know, possibly the most difficult decade during the whole troubles, and yet it happened. So small things can make things happen. I think it's a very long way off that there will be an All-Ireland team, but I do think that the lack of success, and I think there is going to be a lot of lack of success for both Irish teams. Like I think we might be able to get to European Championships because there's so many clubs or countries that get to the European Championships now. Pretty much half of UEFA gets into that party now. But the World Cup's going to become more difficult because there's going to be more places have to be given to African and Asian countries to equalise the World Cup, and that's going to at least maintain the current level of European places, if not even reduce those places. So and just the quality of the players producing on this island now is I just don't see it as being capable for us to get to World Cups. That may bring out the debate in the future between the FAI and IFA. Look, if we want to get to a World Cup again, we have to do it together. It may happen, it may not, but I think that is the best avenue. I think of something like this happening.
Gerry, do you think we need an All-Ireland domestic league before we talk about an All-Ireland team, or can you do the All-Ireland team first? What do you think that if this was to happen, in a parallel universe, what would be the sequence, the proper sequence?
Well, I think it's been touched on a few times, but the primary motivator in all of this will be finances and corporate interests. And I think if the clubs and the associations and others who are currently involved in the project that Kieran Lucid has proposed, I think you might find then that football supporters and more broadly speaking society might see the big advantages of operating as an island, and you might then find that it could open the door or the gateway to a more realistic chance of having an all-island team. So I think for me the chronology of that would need to be an all-island league and then potentially an all-island team.
In terms of when Kieran Lucid's floated the idea, there seemed to be a lukewarm response from northern clubs. Did you get that impression too?
I did, but I think privately they know that the population of the north can't sustain a full-time professional football industry. And if you look at Scotland, I think that with an all-island league, we could become something similar to what the Scottish have in terms of their Premier League. I don't think it's feasible in the north for us to seriously consider. Some of the clubs have tried it, Larne, Glentoran, Linfield down the years. Some of them have tried a more full-time approach, but we simply don't have the population or the finance or the interest to achieve anything of any note or any significance. And I think that you see even with the recent progress of some of the teams in the League of Ireland in terms of European results, even over the last week or so, you see what can be achieved. Bigger population, bigger pool to draw players from, more interest, keep it new, keep it relevant. The problem is people get fed up and people get disinterested very quickly. And I think that the All-Ireland League will actually end up being something that isn't political whatsoever, but will be something that will benefit football and will benefit football clubs, football players and fans. And then, in my view, the broad economy of the entire island then gets a bounce from that as well.
Cormac, same question. Actually, I'd like to get your view on that. Do you think you need that domestic league first, or do you think it could happen before that?
Well, some people said actually it's actually more difficult to get a United Ireland football team than it is to get a United Ireland. So it's who knows. But yeah, I agree with. I think the points Gerry made was really on point. That I think an All Ireland league. I think it's easier to come about. First of all, I think there's more very straightforward reasons why it could happen than say an All Ireland football team. So I think that probably would happen first, and it would make sense probably that does happen first. And 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 for those reasons as well, it is so unsustainable for, say, a Northern Ireland league to really flourish and to do well and compete and even get to later stages in European competitions with such a small pool of people, not just players, but obviously population as well. And the League of Ireland is definitely had a huge improvement in terms of support, particularly support where this all stems from in terms of money. You look at the Dublin clubs and other clubs around Ireland. They are filling up a lot more than they used to, and that's very encouraging. And you would hope that could, help, put forward the notion of an All Ireland league sooner rather than later. I think it's very. I met Kieran Lucid and people work with him, and there seems a lot of optimism. They've done a lot of homework on it. They've looked at leagues from other countries with comparable populations, and it is achievable. If you say have an island population of what would it be now, about 7 million people, close to 7 million people, you're comparing yourself to Denmark, you're compared to other Scandinavian countries who have had success in European competitions and have made money from those leagues. It does seem like it's a feasible project if there was to be buy-in for it.
Yeah. Here's the thing, guys. I'd like to ask you both. We can have an All-Ireland team in rugby, cricket, hockey. Why is soccer such a problem? Is it? I don't want to be sort of boiling it down to simply class. Is it a class thing? Because soccer is not exclusively, but is probably has its roots in a working class game. Correct me if I'm wrong. But why is it that we can't do it in football? Cormac first.
Yeah, I've written a lot about this. Like in my last book, Birth at the Border, I've got a chapter on why most sports are All Ireland bodies, and sports like football and athletics actually became divided after partition. And the main reason is internal governance structures in many ways. Take rugby, for example. Rugby is an All Ireland sport. And the primary reason for that as well is that it was administered by unionists from north and south when partition happened. So for example, there's big issues from some people in the south actually about the rugby governance of Ireland, that they felt it was a very unionist body. They refused to play the tricolour in Lansdowne Road, but they had no problem playing the Union Jack or flying the Union Jack in Ravenhill. It insisted on obviously alternating international matches between Ravenhill and Lansdowne Road. It toasted the King. Those are very controversial in the 20s and 30s in Irish Free State. So the IRFU were never going to split north-south bases, because a lot of his administrators were actually unionists in outlook. And it often comes down to the people who either play or administer the game are homogeneous in outlook. You're either Protestant unionists or the Catholic nationalists. Same with GA. GA was never going to be a partitionist body. But it has catered for primarily one community. There's often less opportunities for division. But soccer, yeah, it definitely has those kind of difficulties around class, around being popular among Protestants and Catholics. But so of other All-Ireland sports like boxing, for example, and horse racing, and they've remained All-Ireland. So it often comes down to internal governance reasons. Most of the sports that have remained All-Ireland sports have very democratic governance structures. They try and accommodate all the provinces. They try to alternate their meetings. They give a lot of say to the various different regions and different outlooks. And that's where soccer lacked, particularly leading up to its division. And that was the primary reason why it split, whereas other sports remained united.
And Gerry, anything to add on that debate that we can't get it together in football, but other sports it seems to be quite smooth?
Yeah, I don't actually think it's a class issue. I think Cormac's raised the point of other sports that I think widely recognised that boxing is generally a working class sport, and it's organised on an all-island basis. I think if you even look at the recent Olympics, where Rory McIlroy, no problem playing for Ireland, for Team Ireland, and I just think that here in the north, we probably lack a bit of vision, and we probably lack a bit of leadership on this broad issue. And if we could see past the narrow confines of what we are currently operating in, or the restrictions that we currently operate in, I think that that if we could identify some serious leaders and some people of vision that this might become something that is a wee bit more achievable.
Mm-hmm. Can we just jump to eligibility? That's caused an awful lot of rancor, particularly from the IFA side of things. They feel aggrieved that players that they have maybe developed or helped develop at an underage level, and then some of those players decide to declare for the South. A very high profile, probably the most recent one. It's always good to take a case study to illustrate the point. Mark Sykes, Gerry, who you know very well, you represent him. I did the interview with Mark a few months back. The fact that he had played for Northern Ireland up to, I think, under 21, correct me if I'm wrong, and then he decided that he wanted to play for the South. Interestingly, in that interview, that he said he was happy if he never got to play for the Republic of Ireland, that he was happy with that decision because he felt that's the team that he wanted to play for. He could have built up caps with the North, but he was prepared to gamble and go with the South. And that was an emotional decision, I think. Maybe you could elaborate, you would know Mark better than others, and just for our viewers, about Mark's sort of thought processes in making that decision.
Well, I think just for a second, if we leave Mark as an individual to one side, the FAI have a responsibility here that very few ever talk about, or very few might even realise. And as a young footballer grows up in the North, they don't have the opportunity or the chance to play really at a younger age group for Ireland. There are no trials, essentially. There are no academies. There is nothing really for a young 12, 13, 14-year-old in the North to choose to play for Ireland. The only choice that you have as a youngster, essentially, is to play for Northern Ireland. So it's not really a strong argument, in my view, to say that you have taken advantage of the system in the North, when it's really the only system that you could have actually entered into. And in my view, the FAI should rectify that. They should remedy that issue so that young players in the North who are of an Irish national identity, of an Irish national community background, who might be Irish passport holders or Irish speakers, and who are as Irish as somebody in Cork or Kerry, they should, in my view, have that opportunity to play for Ireland from a young age and not be forced into the IFA system. And I think also that would help the IFA, because it means then that they aren't and they don't have to put their resources into a young player who might then, at the age of 19 or 20 or 21, decide that they want to play for Ireland. So I think that's a crucial point in all of this. There is no infrastructure in the North for a young player to choose to play for Ireland over the North.
That's interesting, Gerry. You think then, by extension of what you say, that the FAI should be more active, they should have more soccer camps, more presence in the North, even though that would be, some people would say, oh, that may be too controversial, but that's by extension that's what the FAI should be doing, do you think?
Well, it remedies the complaint, essentially, that resources are being wasted on players who then move at a later age. So I think that what it does is it solves problems on all sides. It allows the FAI to access those players at a younger age, but it also then stops those players from moving at a later age, because you could then say, well, if you choose at a young age to go through the FAI system, that you can't then switch to the IFA system and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Cormac, I'd like to bring you in on that as well.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult one, I must say. I get what you're saying, Gerry. Obviously, that one of the biggest complaints is the fact that they've gone through the Northern Ireland system and they're dumped like a hot potato and get representative honours at senior level for FAI based teams. You could say the same has happened in the South with people like Jack Grealish and Declan Rice. They got their colours through the youth systems for Republic of Ireland, and even Declan Rice got some international caps, and they move on to England. I think if you did that though, I do see people having difficulty with the FAI encroaching on Northern Territory as well. Though I think that would create another problem. And two, it's a very difficult one. I think the IFA's biggest problem is the FAI seem to actively want Northern Ireland players to sign up for them, to represent Ireland. That problem potentially is the biggest problem the IFA have with the FAI. But if a person, say like McLean or Darren Gibson or Mark Sykes, want to represent Ireland, I think they're entitled to do that, though, and that is the bottom line. Ultimately, it is the players' decision who they want to represent, and that should be allowed.
Sorry, go ahead, Jerry.
I think it's important, though, Cormac, to understand and respect that half the population of the North wouldn't regard the FAI organising academies or camps as encroaching. They would regard the FAI as their team, as their organisation, as their national association. And I think players like Grealish might be one-offs, but the reality is in the North, you have approximately 50% of the people who look to to Dublin, to look to the FAI, and who regard that team as their team, and they don't regard it as a 26 county team. They don't regard it as the Republic of Ireland team. They regard it as the team of Ireland, the team of the 32 counties. And I think as time progresses, and as demographics change, you will see that more and more. And I think the FAI would be wise to take action on that.
No, I don't disagree with you. I absolutely do. But I'm saying there would be certainly half the population would feel it like it's encroachment as well, though. And how do you actually look into that? What say people from Union's community would think about the FAI setting up camps and actually having underage players from the North and they're based in the North basically from the start. I'm saying there certainly would be issues from the Union's point of view from that.
But then we're getting to the crux of it, Cormac, in the sense that we talked about this a couple of days ago and we had a chat. The playing of God Save the Queen.
Yeah.
The IFA do not help themselves. Between 2013 and 2018 at the Irish Cup final, the IFA took, I think, for what it's worth, was a very prudent and right decision. They did not play God Save the Queen if there was a team from maybe a nationalist or Catholic background. In the interest, and to quote the IFA, fostering a politically neutral environment. Come 2018, Coleraine and Cliftonville competed in the Irish Cup final, and they decided to go back on that. And they played God Save the Queen. I covered the match at Windsor Park, and it was such a toxic atmosphere. The build-up was ruined by the fact that the IFA decided to play the anthem. And I just thought it was a massive own goal. I thought it was an exercise in self-harm by the IFA to do that. And I just, people may say the IFA are making strides. They are making strides, concerted attempts over the last few years to purge the Billy Boy element out, and they've done that very successfully. And they're working at grassroots. They're working at the female game and all those things. But as Roy Keane once said, he says you shouldn't praise the postman for delivering your letters. That's what they're there to do. But I just thought that that day was a 3 steps forwards, 4 steps back for the IFA. I think the anthem is, for many people, is the main stumbling block now.
I 100% agree with you. I think the IFA have made progress though in the last couple of decades. It's Football for All campaign. It's attempts to adopt the green colour as opposed to red, white, and blue. It's drowning out of sectarian chants through loudspeakers in Windsor Park. Those have helped, I think. But yeah, I 100% agree with you. If you have God Save the Queen as your anthem, you're not going to attract people from pretty much half the population of the North to your team. And it's like I just don't see them doing it because they're just stuck in that rut, and they're very obstinate about it. Look at Scotland, look at Wales. They don't feel the need to have the God Save the Queen as their anthem. And it has been a bit of a joke, throughout the years. Why if England play in Northern Ireland, where you've got two versions of God Save the Queen, but it has been this running kind of commentaries going on about this issue. And I there's no way that we will ever have unity within Northern Ireland football if God Save the Queen remains. Now, look, obviously most nationals I still think will have allegiance towards the Ireland team, but I think it certainly would help relations between both communities if they remove that as random. They don't need it, honestly. You know?
Yeah. Gerry?
Yeah, I think it's I think when we look back at history in this place, it wasn't too long ago that God Save the Queen was being played in cinemas at the end of the night, and theatres and university graduation ceremonies. And I think football has probably become one of the last areas that isn't actually a shared space. And I mean Windsor Park, that it must make efforts, the IFA must make efforts to make Windsor Park a more shared and open environment. I think it is very important to acknowledge that they have tried and that they are trying, and there are some great people involved in the IFA. They've made some very shrewd appointments in the last number of years. But I think, again, when I speak earlier about people with leadership and vision, why is nobody suggesting that we play both anthems for the Northern Ireland team? Why not fly both flags? Why not have a page in a matchday programme, as Gaeilge? Why not seriously attempt to reach out to those people who live in the 6 counties but who are of an Irish national identity? Football for All has been a sound, noble enough project, but it's Football for All on the basis of you support Northern Ireland as it currently exists and the IFA as it currently operates. There is no real space within any of that for supporting Northern Ireland but flying your tricolour. I'm an Irish citizen, I'm an Irish person, I live in the north, I'm Irish. I'm quite prepared and happy to support the Northern Ireland team, but there is absolutely no reflection for my Irish identity or my Irish national identity or citizenship. And I think the IFA know that they have major problems there. I think Cormac is absolutely spot on. I just don't think they want to change. And there's probably an element of risk in it for them, because they think that if we change, well, will we even attract those nationalists to come to Windsor Park? And then if we change, do we lose the core of our support, which, let's face it, is...
Lost your Gerry there for a second. Well, Gerry sorts his connection out there. Cormac, can I ask you, how do you think do you think sport, maybe politicians don't appreciate the power of sport in terms of reconciling the island? Like if you were building a state, I think the emblems are so important. You'd have a team, you'd have sports teams that represent it all. Do you think that maybe political unionism here doesn't appreciate the power of that potential reconciliation through things like sport and teams like that?
Yeah, but I think sport, it's often been overstated, the reconciliation power of sport. Sport can be very divisive as well, and actually can lead to wars even, and actually lead to conflict. So let's not forget that sport, as well as actually being a kind of a harbinger of peace, can actually be a harbinger of war as well. So that is important. Politicians sometimes jump on the bandwagon, if it suits them, that they think there's electoral gain to support a kind of a measure or a kind of a campaign. Whether it's in sport or anything else, they look to that. Will it gain the votes? And that's what politicians do. They always have to be aware of that. I think when it comes to all people, not just politicians, but all people have to just be aware of emblems and anthems and kind of and flags and so on. Because there is going to be a border poll. There is going to be continued debate on the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. And those things are going to be important, and they definitely come up more in sport than any other aspect of our lives. We see those emblems more in sport than most other aspects of life. We see flags a lot more on the international stage. we hear anthems, we see other emblems, and those very. And Gerry made a very good point about personally, I think a neutral anthem or neutral flags would be better than having two national anthems or two flags. Personally, I think it'd be more opportunity for uniting than division if you had more of a neutral flag. That's what other sports have done. I think that's worked well overall, except for that awful RFU song, Ireland's Call. Maybe choose a better song. No, I do think they're important, and it's not just politicians have to look at that. We all have to look at that. If we are serious about uniting, say, a football team, for example, we really have to take seriously those emblems because they're important and they really matter.
It's interesting, Cormac. There wasn't that neat symmetry back, in partition. Obviously, that was the backdrop of the split, but it wasn't the reason. The internal governance was probably the reason, the chief reason for the split back in 21. But do you think there is a neat symmetry now, an unfortunately neat symmetry now, where it is the politics of the day that is very much dictating what happens?
I think it's a big factor, certainly. I think the biggest stumbling block I feel for a United Ireland football team is probably the loyalist community, the unionists who support the Northern Ireland team. And I do think a lot of polls have been done on this. Do you want United Ireland? And the University of Ulster have over the last couple of decades issued a number of polls on do you want a United Ireland football team? And pretty much all demographics in the south, pretty much most people, it'd be a high percentage would be for an All Ireland team. Most Catholics actually are for an All Ireland team. Even the majority, the majority of Protestants in Northern Ireland say they don't want an All Ireland team, but it's a very small majority. But 40% have said they would like an All Ireland team. So there is grounds there for it. But I just think that the hardcore support of that Northern Ireland football team would be against that move, and they feel it's a really big important part of their identity, and they feel entrapped now. They feel that their identity is being taken away from them, and this is the last battle, as it were, for some loyalists that they want to retain this. So yeah, absolutely, the politics of today is absolutely very strong in that kind of in stopping the debate or in preventing an All Ireland team, I think.
Gerry, how do you win over that section of population? That the Cormac talks about, that loyalist community that feel as if their identity is being attacked. How do you score that one?
I think you constantly do your best to reassure. You constantly do your best to comfort, essentially, that section of our population, because I think Cormac's right again that this referendum is coming, and the indications are that it could be very close when it does come. So I think football, interestingly, is very closely related to politics. International football is very political, regardless of what anybody says that you should keep politics out of sport. It sounds good, but in practice, it doesn't actually work. And I think that as time moves on, the Ireland team as well, if it looks like we're moving towards an all Ireland team, I think it's important that the FAI start to reach out to those in the north who don't want to lose the Northern Ireland football team. I think it's important that I've suggested that the IFA must reach out to nationalists in the north, and similarly, I think there's a job there for the FAI that they probably aren't even thinking about. It probably isn't even on the radar. But demographics are changing very, very quickly in the north. So society will change very quickly. The whole conversation about change on this island will and is quickly becoming the main societal conversation and discourse. And I think that's only going to continue. And if you look particularly at young people and the demographics of young people in the north, the age of school attending children at the moment. The nationalist community largely outstrip the unionist community. So from a football perspective, if the IFA don't address some of the issues that we've spoken about today, then what will happen is more and more of these young children, and don't forget there's a extremely confident young nationalist population now in the north, and they're not held back by the constraints of the past. They're educated, they are essentially ready for changes that might come, but they don't like the idea of being forced to stand for God Save the Queen or stand under the Union flag or a white Ulster flag in the way that players might have done in the past and just get on with it. That won't happen in the next 5-10 years. So we have issues. The IFA have issues. They should address those issues because they know about them. They have appointed people in the past to go out and explore and ask what are the issues. They didn't think at one stage that anthems and flags and emblems and songs were a real problem, but they know now because they've been told. And at various age groups at the moment, there are players who represent Northern Ireland, but who have significant difficulty with what goes on. And again, the IFA know that. So in my view, they should take action. They should implement change. They should consult as widely as possible. And similarly, the FAI should get ready for whatever change might be coming as well.
Last two questions, guys. One of them is we could maybe pick our best 11 north and south over the years. Well, we'll come to that in a minute because I know viewers will actually make very straight judgments about our football sort of knowledge on that. And the other is to Cormac first, and then I'll ask Jerry the same question. If we could crystal ball gaze 10 years down the line, Cormac, are we maybe going to be still on a Zoom talking about the same things, that we're no further on, and we're still got the anthem issue, we've still got a thing that maybe we haven't touched upon, the financial ruin of the FAI? You know, hopefully they come out of that, which is an important thing too, but in terms of where we're going to be in 10 years' time, do you think we're going to be any way further on in terms of having an All-Ireland team?
I'm interested that Jerry said about the FAI haven't even thought about this prospect of an All-Ireland team maybe down in the future, but I'd say the FAI are just in complete survival mode at the moment. So will there be an FAI in 10 years' time? Look, there will be obviously a football governing body, but it could be very differently structured than what it is now. Look, it's very hard to say. I don't see. I think 10 years is a short lifespan to answer for this question, because we've had these conversations for decades now, and it still always comes up every year when there's a big World Cup qualifying or European qualifier campaign, and it coincides, say, with an Irish rugby game. Everyone asks, why is there one rugby team, one and two football teams? Who knows? It actually does depend on the border poll in many respects as well, because when is there going to be a border poll? And that obviously is some way dependent on who's in power in Britain at the time, because the Secretary of State gets to choose when he thinks the conditions are right for or she thinks the conditions are right for a border poll. So if there was a border poll in 10 years' time, I think the debate would kind of ratchet up a gear, I think, if that happens. Personally, I think there may be some movement on anthems and emblems. I still think we won't have an All-Ireland team in 10 years. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see an All-Ireland team. I think our only chance of qualifying for a World Cup is an All-Ireland team, and an All-Ireland League as well, for that matter. But I'm hopeful, but not optimistic.
Mm-hmm. So you've got a couple of invaluable minute or two here, Cormac, to rack your brain for your team here, while I ask Jerry the same question. Cormac's right. 10 years is a very short time. What's your thoughts, Jerry?
I think we need to be very conscious that things are moving very quickly. Who would have predicted Brexit? And that has been a game changer in terms of the entire political landscape in the north. But there's one thing that nobody has thought about or discussed, and that is that even if you do have a United Ireland, you might still end up with a Northern Ireland football team. Cormac has said previously that FIFA can be very flexible. And we do know that the Northern Ireland football team is very dear to many unionists in the north. So that could end up being one of the outworkings of a new and united Ireland. Who knows? None of us really can predict where we're going with all of this. But I do think that my personal preference, is evidently an all-island football team. I think that would contribute to a broad sense of being at one with themselves. But I do think that in a United Ireland or All-Ireland football team, that again, it can't be the tricolour and around the vein. It must recognise that you are bringing in a significant section of hundreds of thousands of people in the north who hold dear their Northern Irish identity and their British identity. So again, that's why I think the FAI need to start thinking about these things.
Okay, guys, just do quickly. Our best 11. Anyone have any issues with Pat Jennings?
No.
Centre.
Obviously, I remember Packy Bonner saving against Romania very fondly in 1990, but I think Jennings has been the best goalkeeper.
Yeah. Paul McGrath is irrefutably our centre back. He would make a World 11.
You could have a midfield even.
Yeah, exactly. He would make a World 11, never mind an All-Ireland team. I've just jotted down Steve Staunton left back. Any better on that?
Arguably Stuart Dallas at the moment.
Dallas has done brilliantly, hasn't he?
But the irony is, Brendan, that as much as I support Ireland and want an Irish and all-Ireland team, my bias might be with many of the players from the north.
Yeah, that's true. Dennis Irwin, Cormac, is a right back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or left back. That man can play anywhere. Who would you partner with McGrath in the middle? I jotted down Mal Donaghy here. Mal Donaghy was a Rolls Royce of a player, could play anywhere across the back. But there's some good centre backs in that Republic team over the last 20 years.
When I started Sporting United, Mal Donaghy was that. I was in '85, so Mal Donaghy was playing for United at the time. Where did Martin O'Neill? What position did Martin O'Neill play in?
Centre midfield.
Centre midfield, yeah.
Yeah, maybe him and Keane together wouldn't be bad.
Giles, Brady, right side.
This isn't much of an all-island team, by the way, man.
No.
George Best is obviously going to be there anyway. He's not on the team, probably.
Yeah. Well, but if you're going back further, Cormac, you could go Bertie Peacock, Danny Blanchflower.
You've got Billy Bingham was known as a good striker as well, you say.
Yeah. I would proffer Damien Duff. Damien Duff. I watched Damien Duff in his real pomp around 2002, 2004. He was untouchable. It was a joy just to go down, to make the 100-mile journey down to the Lansdowne Road and watch him. He was outrageously good around that period.
Yeah, he was actually brilliant for the first league that Chelsea won under Mourinho. He was fantastic that season.
Yeah. And up front, we've obviously got Best. Cormac and I talked about this. Robbie Keane, probably the much maligned Robbie Keane when he played. Cormac, people wanted more out of him. But when he's gone, so did the goals. The goals disappeared too, almost.
Yeah. What we were saying is I was never a big fan of Robbie Keane when he was playing, but he did score a lot of goals and important goals too. I was actually behind the goal when he scored against Germany in the World Cup. And
also, I think it's important when you're considering these players to take into consideration what they achieved at club level.
Yeah.
Some of these players played at the absolute highest level of the game. And interestingly, there are others who were stars at international level, like David Healy, but who just couldn't produce the same level of same standard at club level. So I think, because we're talking there about Paul McGrath, and there's Mick McCarthy evidently as well, and so many other giants. But Aaron Hughes, Gareth Macaulay played English Premier League football almost their entire careers, hundreds and hundreds of appearances, significant numbers of caps as well. But I just think that what happened down the years was that the Ireland players tended to play at a higher level, generally speaking. And, with the exception maybe Johnny Evans, Man United, playing at a very high level. So, I mean, it's so difficult to name your
top generation as well. Like Gerry Armstrong. I don't really remember Gerry Armstrong playing or Martin O'Neill playing. But you hear the stories about what they achieved and so on. And obviously the 58 team, like Harry Gregg, was Harry Gregg better than Pat Jennings? I don't know.
Yeah. It's that last couple of minutes just shows that with no formation, guys. There's no tactics there. We just kind of threw a team out together.
Mike Keane is captain, though.
Absolutely, I'm with you, Cormac.
You leave us, Cormac. You couldn't make him captain.
But there's.
I'll have that debate again on SciPad.
Yeah. But listen, guys, we'll just wrap it up. Thanks very much. It was very, very informative, very, very insightful, and very, very enjoyable. So thank you very much, Cormac, and thank you very much, Gerry. It was absolutely my pleasure to take part in this. Thank you.